legislature, they would put in requests from the municipality and say, we want to.
Frederick was either the majority.
They would put in a request and say, we want to work on Julick Road. Oh, no, Julick
That's
Road.
state road.
I'm trying to think of a.
Dubin.
So both.
Dubin.
Anyway.
Yes.
It's both or just Muni?
This is just
Just
Muni.
Muni.
So this doesn't include the DOT money that they do work on the highway. So the Seward or the Glen. That's not included in this.
There's a lot of that going on. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
All right. It was taken care of.
Thank you. Mr. Gates.
I'm assuming this doesn't include grand scope for capital projects.
For which projects? No, it does.
It does.
It does. So what does that look like a little bit? You'll want to look up here at the state legislative line. 2013, there were 592 projects, and there was a balance in our account of 290. And as you kind of go through 2013, there was an increase of 70 projects and almost $100 million. 2014, there was a decrease, but there was an increase in the amount of money that was coming in. And then you can see 2015, you start coming down, and you get to 2018, the last full year that we have. There are 121 projects and only $125.2 million left outstanding. And I will point out, half of that is the Port of Alaska. So 42 million was just appropriated by the Assembly. So next year, that money will be half of what it is, plus $484,000 from the grant that we received for Jewel Lake. And I was just going to go through and show you some of the projects that were done with this money. Yosemite Drive, Dubin Street, the Girdwood Fire Department renovation, South Anchorage Sports Park, Alberg Avenue, Cordova Street, Pioneer Drive, the Shugak Fire Department replacement, Sullivan Arena, Diamond Boulevard, Eagle River traffic mitigation, and the Port of Alaska. So these are all projects that, with as we look forward and look out at all of the projects that need to be done, these are the types of projects that aren't going to be funded or are going to wait an additional 5, 10, 15 years until the municipality has the capacity to bond for it.
Yes, Ms. Kennedy.
Well, I guess I just wanted to point out Yosemite Drive is done, Chugach Fire Department replacement is done, Eagle River traffic mitigation is definitely on hold. But anyway.
These are all projects that were funded with these state grants, though.
Right.
So.
Right. But the money still sits there waiting for the traffic mitigation.
Yeah. That's part of the $125 million that we still have. So, a couple of the options. The bed tax, something you guys are very familiar with. The current structure. Voters in 2005 approved a 4% increase to the bed tax to where it currently sits at 12%. Just so everyone knows, 1/3 of it goes to the promotion of the tourism industry, 1/3 to the financing of Anchorage convention centers, and 1/3 to general government. So what does that look like for 2020? About $11 million for tourism, $11 million to convention centers, $11 million to the MOA. So, sure.
Ms. Kennedy. Yeah.
Thank you. So is there still debt owed on the convention center, or is that just now paying basically maintenance or refresh or what?
It is. There's still debt. The latest numbers that I've
Yeah, through the chair, that actually goes to, there's a semi-complex financial waterfall system that talks about, you get the money here, it trickles down to this fund, this fund, this fund. Basically what it goes towards outstanding debt on the NINA. It does go, a portion of it to the capital reserve fund that was set up. And so,
Future maintenance?
exactly right, yeah. And then a portion of it goes towards the contract management.
And it's approximately $95 or $100 million.
So one of the things that I want to lead with on each of these options for ease of discussion today, what we did was we selected an even 2% for all of these. So just so we can kind of have a discussion. So I'm going to go through a number of different items just to kind of lay out what they look like. But a 2% bed tax, or 2% increase would take it from 12 to 14%. That would raise roughly $5.6 million per year. One of the discussion points is the diversification of our revenue. I think this is something that's important. It's something that credit rating agencies really like. So if we essentially did 50% would go underneath the tax cap, 50% above, you would see an $8 per $100,000 reduction in your property taxes with a 2% increase to the bed tax.
Okay. Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Mr. Dunn.
So I think, just to go off what you just said, so we are making an assumption in all these cases that we're able to go to the people of Anchorage and they will approve at least a portion of it to go outside the tax cap. That's what you're
Correct.
saying?
Yep.
And just for simplicity, you've chosen 2%, half of which would go under the tax cap, half of which would go outside of it. And that's
Yes.
the model for the rest of the
That's the
presentation.
model for the rest of them.
Thank you.
And then just information about how it would be implemented. Because we already have a bed tax and we already have people, there would be no additional employees, MOA employees that would be necessary in Dan's department to implement this. Implementation date, this is obviously the one that would be essentially turned on or increased the quickest because we already have it. And again, this is all assuming an April ballot initiative and approval by the voters. So you'd essentially turn this one on July 1st of 2020.
Can I ask one clarifying question?
Yeah, go ahead.
When you say 5.6 million, is that the total or is that the amount outside the cap?
That is the total.
Okay, so 2.8, thanks.
Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, I forgot. We still have a rental car tax?
Is it?
Yeah. And you haven't put it in, or is it trivial?
Not trivial.
It's about 8%.
About $6 or $7 million.
The trivial amount is what we could change and how much would it bring in.
It's about 8%, and it sounds like 8% brings in 6 or 7 million.
Yeah. It wouldn't be this level, it might be another $1 million or so. You know,
Okay,
raise
all right,
for-
thank you, thank you.
I'm going to pull a crock here. So, would this then get split up between all three of us, or would it go strict to general?
The way that
Felix, you need to keep pacing though.
the way that this is structured is the full 2% would go to the MOA.
Got it. Okay.
That's just how we set it up before.
Good question, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
One of the questions that we've gotten asked by others are some of these deductible on either on your federal taxes, and on all of these or on most of these, it's going to be dependent on the buyer. So if you're on a business trip and you're coming through and you are purchasing your hotel and you submit it back into your business, then yes, that might be deductible on your federal. That amount for the business may be deductible. The total number of payees, there's roughly 400 payees for the bed tax. The national average is 14%.
Excuse me, is that 400 rooms or 400?
400 establishments.
Establishments. Wow.
Does that include Airbnb and all the other platforms?
Does that include Airbnb and all the other platforms?
Yeah, Airbnb is its own entity, but those are all the reporting entities that collect the tax.
Wow.
So Airbnb becomes one.
Right, they count as one. Airbnb is.
So we also wanted to kind of give you a sense of who's paying this, who are paying these taxes. So roughly 10 to 15% of the residents of the municipality are paying the bed tax. I guess a lot of people, 10 to 15% of just go on staycations. Businesses, we didn't. I don't think we put this because it's the individual that's paying it, but I'm sure a lot of the people that are paying it are maybe on business trips or things like that. But just for that, so visitors, tourists, and commuters, they pay 85 to 90% of the total bed tax revenue. So the next one is the alcohol tax. Many of you are familiar with. Again, 2%. Bringing about $5.2 million total. about $8 per 100,000 if you do the 50/50. We need to hire an additional 3 employees to implement this and get it off the ground and run it every single year. Again, this one would take about 9 months to implement, so you'd be looking, if voters approved in April, you'd be looking at starting January of 2021.
Sorry, I just want to clarify one thing that you just said. So you would only need to hire 3 employees, period, to get it up and going, right? You wouldn't have to hire any employees after that?
Yeah, it would just be three for the perpetual life of the tax.
Okay, thank you.
Again, is it deductible on your taxes and then on the buyer? Number of payees, there would be about 450 establishments that would pay this tax to the municipality.
But people would pay the tax, not the.
Yes, people would pay it, but the number of establishments that would be collecting the tax.
I just want to make that comment
Yes.
because they complained last time.
Yep.
that-
It is the individual that pays it, not the business. So, on this one, residents, about 85 to 90% of residents would pay this. Businesses, again, there might be some. And then visitors, tourists, commuters, about 10 to 15%. So the sales tax, the other one that you're probably familiar with, again, 2% would raise about $73 million. And this is considering this is a general broad-based sales tax with, I think, essentially the reasonable or the standard exemptions that most communities have. Food, medicine, those types of things, I think, would be all exempt. But Dan could probably give a better overview of which ones.
It's not services, it's goods only, has reasonable exemptions. It does have built into this number a $200 cap, which is actually an extra provision that a lot of jurisdictions don't have. So that cap does squeeze down on the revenue number.
That's the question.
Yes, I do.
You're talking about a cap as to how much of a purchase you can tax.
How much total tax you can pay no matter what you're paying for.
So I have a real problem with that because I think that that makes it even more regressive. So I wouldn't support that. I'm just going to put that up.
And again, this is just us providing information. We can provide what the numbers would look like without that on there, or if it looked a little bit different. We can definitely do that. But
I would love to see that because I think the kind of sales tax that I and probably other people are interested in wouldn't have a cap like that.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
No, she got it.
When we had this discussion 2.5 years ago when Mr. Evans brought forward a sales tax, I asked if we could make it seasonal. And he was opposed to that. We didn't make it seasonal. The proposal died. I assume this is year-round. I've also heard some folks say that there's legal issues with making something seasonal. Is there anyone who can comment on that? Is there some prohibition to make it seasonal during the summer? Because I know other communities have done it.
I have not heard any of those, but we can definitely find out. Dan, are there any restrictions on making it a seasonal sales tax?
There are no restrictions. It would be very impractical because you have to have the people to do the work, and you can't just hire people seasonally to cover a sales tax. It's not administratively, it doesn't work well at all. And the state had the same issue too when that was proposed at the state level.
But there are communities around the state that do it, right? I mean, it doesn't catch a can.
If they are, they're very small. They're nothing compared to Anchorage. So.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Days.
Yeah. So, what percentage of our income from alcohol taxes come from bars as opposed to people making buying package?
I believe currently none of it comes from people that buy it in the store or in a bar because it's a wholesale tax. And we don't actually administer that. That is a state tax. We actually don't have a municipal tax on alcohol at this point.
To me, that the proposed, it said 85%.
No, I'm just thinking about the future. I'm very interested in fleecing the tourists. And so on and so forth. So there's no mechanism where we could do it to get any revenue off the tourists buying drinks in the local bars.
Not currently.
Have other jurisdictions, other states, is there a paradigm or a model out there somewhere, somebody's doing that?
And it's like a alcohol sales tax?
Yeah, something like that, where the drinking tourists are paying for the local drunks.
Subsidizing the local.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of communities around the country that have some sort of an alcohol sales tax on the drinks.
Yeah, so you all haven't done that through the thinking process, or?
Well, we ran an alcohol tax.
Yeah.
I thought that was officially an excise tax.
I
No,
saw
no,
some
it was
purple
a
guy
retail
back here
sales
with
tax.
handsprings.
Thank you. Mr. Dummer.
Is this 2% additive to some of our other taxes? So, for example, we already have a tax on cigarettes, added 2%. Or we have a tax on marijuana, does this add 2%? And obviously, alcohol would be included. So is that the case?
I believe when it was modeled, it was not to tax on a tax that already exists. So I think that's your question.
Okay, so we would not be increasing taxes on marijuana, cigarettes. We would be including alcohol because they're not taxed yet.
Correct.
Correct. And this was just a model that was worked on, but the model changes radically for every single decision you guys would make if you ever got here. So.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you tell me, I know you brought up at the beginning the paradigm we're working within, but can you tell me why you picked 2?
Just ease of conversation. No other reason for today. I mean, we can obviously model any number of different rates.
Just strikes me that that's a really, really low sales tax. I mean, even the receipt there.
Thank you.
It might.
So, what does that look like if we put 50% of that under property tax? That you're starting to get, it's $107 per $100,000 would be how property taxes would be reduced. So that'd be $37 million would go towards underneath the tax cap, and 37 above. But on the flip side, because of the number of establishments, pretty much almost every single establishment would be required to collect. You'd be looking at 25 to 30 employees that we would have to hire to run this and maintain this every single year.
So that'd be $2 or $3 million a year. Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
It's about $3 million.
Mr. Gaines.
Is the 73 million figure, is that net after the costs of the employees, or is that a gross?
Gross.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Not to get too much into like debate, and I want you to keep moving through this presentation, but I'll just state at the outset that I'm skeptical of that 107 number in the sense that I do think that a homeowner will experience that. I think a lot of renters don't. I think that when you lower property taxes on a lot of apartment buildings, the owners do not pass on those savings to the renters. I think that has been sort of demonstrated in a lot of other communities.
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting discussion. Ms. Quinn Davis.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Why is the implementation date so late? It would just take a while to get it up and running because all these employees and such.
Yeah, just with the number of establishments that would have to collect. This is the one that would take by far the longest. You'd be looking at
I
April
would
1st.
say, just from past experience with past assemblies, you're looking at least 6-month process with the assembly to make probably hundreds of decisions. It's very, very detailed. Once those decisions are made on what is taxed and what is not taxed, then you have to design a database that has all those business rules, and just like the SAP payroll system has lots and lots of business rules. Once your system is ready to go, I know, sorry.
Wouldn't SAP be running this? Wouldn't this go through SAP?
Once that, it's a customized system that would have to be used. Once that system is ready to go, and you can flip the switch, then you can start to tax. But until you have all the rules and the system in place, you can't, and it's a very long process, very, very detailed.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Okay,
Oh,
thank
sorry.
you.
Apologies. Mr. Pierce.
I can go. Yeah.
Thank you. Any revenues included for this for an online sales tax? Because if we pass this, will you be eligible to collect that now that AML is going to be implementing
I
that?
believe this number did include the revenues
Yeah, it
from
does,
online
factor
sales
in
tax.
the transactions that could possibly be collected on internet sales. That's true.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. And so I guess that would be another piece to this too, is how much are the implementation costs? Just getting, not just in hiring those 25 to 30 people, but what other kinds of infrastructure needs do we have to go with that? IT,
Well, it included the $3 million, which is about $3 million. It includes people, it includes IT, it includes lawyers, hearing officer, the gamut, furniture. There'd be new space. You have to find space for 25 to 30. It's a whole new division. So it includes everything. Some of it's one time, but $3 million is the first year, and then I'd have to go back and look at what the ongoing cost is. Probably $2.5 million or something after that. So.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
I was just wondering if there's ever been an effort in Anchorage to implement a sales tax. How many times and
I voted on it 3 times.
We voted on it 2 or 3 times.
what did you say?
Sales tax?
on the ballot.
How-
At least
how bad
twice
was it?
in the 90s. Oh, sorry, that was alcohol. Eric has that chart.
Yeah, we do have a history on it. I think it's formally gone to the voters at least a couple times. I think there's been about 4, 5, 6 actual proposals out there. Not all of them got to the ballot. The ones that did get to the ballot is 30% support. So it has quite a gap between what it needed. I
So
think it
those
needs
were like
60%.
20 years ago?
I think 10 or 15 years ago was the most recent one. I can't remember exactly.
Okay, so that's a while ago.
Thank you. Ms. Salaton.
Thank you. Are there any jurisdictions that are implementing an alcohol tax and a sales tax, both as proposed kind of here in some form?
Yes, I think there are a number that have a sales tax and then they have an additive alcohol tax on top of that.
In Alaska?
In Alaska?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. I'd follow up to figure out where. Thanks.
Thank you.
Again, is deductible on your taxes dependent on the buyer. Number of payees, this one is going to be in the thousands, just with the number of businesses and establishments that we have. It's going to be in the thousands. National average is 6%, just as a point of reference. Residents, about 40 we estimate 40 to 60% of this revenue will be paid by residents of the municipality. Roughly 30 to 40% of it will be paid by businesses, and then 10 to 20% of it by visitors, tourists, or commuters. So the new one that most people probably haven't heard of is a payroll tax. That is a tax directly on a business's payroll. We can talk about that more, but 2% payroll tax, and we'll talk about kind of which businesses would be included and which aren't. But 2% payroll tax would raise $78 million. Again, that would be about $114 per $100,000, and we did the 50-50 again. The number of employees that it would take to run this, turn it on, would be 3 to 5, which is significantly smaller. And again, very similar to the alcohol tax. You'd be able to turn it on if there was an April election, January 1st of 2021. And is this deductible on your taxes? Absolutely. This one actually is deductible by the businesses that pay it. And the formula that was used would essentially be any business that had over 50 employees would be assessed this tax with the way that we have it set up here. And again, Treasury can run the numbers. If you do more employees, if you do fewer employees, but this one was based on 50 employees. Number of payees, so there'd be roughly 500 that would qualify or be required to pay this. I don't believe that there's a national average on this one. Again, this one would be paid 100% by the business, and residents and visitors, tourists, commuters wouldn't pay it.
Ms. Salaton.
Thanks. Do we have a general definition of business here in terms of payroll tax, like for-profit versus not-for-profit versus other types of entities? Because a lot of people have payroll. It would be for this model, what you use.
For this model, everyone is included.
Everyone, okay.
anyone that had over 50 employees, unless they were exempted by state law, which there are.
Our model was based on any entity that has to pay unemployment insurance, which is virtually everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
When you say it's deductible on your federal taxes, up to what amount? Is it 100% deductible?
I believe it is.
The business pays it, so it's a business expense. You run a business.
So
expense.
then brings me my next question. Why doesn't every city do this then if the businesses are held? I must be missing something. So what you're describing here is like the businesses are basically held harmless. And
No, it's a deduction,
Yeah.
right? It's like paying for daycare or something.
No,
oh, okay.
Yeah.
like salary, just added to the salary that you would pay anyway.
Okay.
It's not one for one.
It's not a 1-for-1. Well, that's what I'm getting at then. So what is the practical cost for the business?
And we
doing
can
this?
get that.
It's about 25 to 30%, sort of, generally speaking.
In which direction? 25 increase in
25
They can reduce their
increase.
federal tax by 25 to 30%.
of the 2%.
Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So why is the line visitors, tourists, commuters 0%? Wouldn't we be capturing revenue from people who live outside of the MOA but work here?
Yes, however, the business is the one that, the business pays it on their payroll tax. If the resident or the visitor or the commuter paid it, I believe it would be viewed as an income tax, and we are not allowed to implement an income tax on a local level.
Okay, good. Residents are 0 for the same reason.
Yes.
Okay.
So the final one isn't a new tax, but it's an idea that we have included. There's a couple of different options on this one, but it's an idea that we have included in our LEDGE program over the last several years, and that is the community dividend. Essentially, it's and both of these would need to be done at the state level. The state would have to do this. We wouldn't have a role other than advocating for it. But essentially, it would be we'd create a community dividend fund. So we would fund it at, again, $2 billion. It's just a number that we are selecting, and you pay out about 4.25% every year, and that would equate to about $85 million per year. And then the MOA share would be formula driven. So this one is probably the most close to the current community assistance program that pays out. The $4.5 million that we get every year is based on a total fund of $30 million. So think about it, if we increase it by 3 times to $90 million, maybe the community gets $15 to $20 million.
Yeah, let me just say, it skews a little bit when the fund is smaller because there are mandatory minimum payouts for smaller communities. And so the larger the fund gets, the more that the municipality's percentage of that revenue would grow. So out of an $85 million payout, I would expect maybe 30, order of magnitude, $30 to $35 million would come from the municipality.
Ms. Kennedy.
So is this a local version of the permanent fund? Where does the $2 billion come from initially?
It would come from the permanent fund. The state would essentially take $2 billion from the permanent fund and create a new community dividend fund that would be used solely for the payout of money to.
Let me just say, there's a portion of the permanent fund that is in the permanent fund that is not used to create personal dividends. It's the old Emirata Hess settlement, which is about $500 or $600 million. And, I noticed that the legislature has been spending fund earnings on all kinds of projects recently. So excess earnings would be a good place to capitalize the rest of that.
Are any other communities thinking about this?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
I think my questions were answered. Same kind of question.
Thank you. I'll add you, yeah. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Same sorts of questions. What do you think it would take to get there, and what kind of time frame?
I mean, it would take 50% of the legislature and the governor willing to sign that into law.
Mr.
But,
Dunbar.
go ahead. Yeah, I was going to move on to the.
Oh yeah, I have two more questions. Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, I would say as a veteran of the 2010 Berkowitz gubernatorial campaign, it's nice to see this proposal back before us. So I wanted to ask actually about moving on from this. One of the proposals you did not include, which was, and I assume it's because the amount of money is just too low, but we've been talking about having a tax on vaping products and other tobacco. We get about $20 million from tobacco tax right now, and there's this huge chunk of tobacco products that's growing that's now outside of it. So have you guys done any modeling on how much money that might bring in, and is that another revenue proposal worth considering?
I believe that we are working on that.
I think it's in the high hundreds of thousands, perhaps, but right now that tobacco tax is within the tax cap, so, and that was approved by a majority vote of the assembly. We'd have to actually go to the voters and ask for approval to have it be, some portion of it be outside the cap to actually help, provide new revenue. So.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to say that the municipal league is in favor of the community dividend, and that's one of our resolutions. And so, we're not just out there on a limb all by ourselves.
Thank you.
And he stole the lead for the next one. I'm actually going to talk about what the Alaska Municipal League's proposal is. It's essentially creating an Alaska Municipal Services dividend, and essentially the fund size. 2 years ago, the legislature created the POMV. So basically, the percent of market value. So they pull a percentage of the permanent fund, and half of it is designed to go towards state government, the other half for dividends. This plan would change it a little bit, and it'd be 40% to state government, 40% to dividend, and 20% to this municipal services dividend. And just for everyone's information, if it was put in place this year, the state government would have received $1.1 billion. The individual PFD would have received $1.1 billion, and that would have equated to about an $1,800 dividend. And then this fund would have received $586 million. So, again, payout would be 20% per year, $585 million. And again, this is all formula driven. We'd have to develop a formula of how this would be put out there. But AML has put together a number of different components of how they think this would, where the money would go and what categories. So I'll go kind of through that. The first would be they create one for school bond debt. Basically $100 million a year would go towards communities around the state and help them with school bond debt. There'd be an important harbor capital of $40 million that municipalities and places around the state would be able to access this to help them repair and rebuild ports. Community assistance would be $20 million, so it basically that would be kind of $20 million that would be formula driven, and the municipality would be able to use it on whatever they wanted. Road and rural airport maintenance would be funded at $100 million. Again, that would go back to pumping more money into the communities. The state capital budget slide that you saw, that would fill some of that gap. Law enforcement, $80 million. So again, and then deferred building and K-12 maintenance, $75 million. And then they have a senior citizen property tax exemption reimbursement of $84 million. And again, this is just kind of the proposal that AML has kind of put together. It's all subject to be changed or tinkered with a little bit, but my understanding of the conversations that they've had is they've gotten a lot of positive feedback from members of the legislature on this. And I think it's important to note that if we move to something like this, the municipalities would be responsible for taking on a lot more responsibility that is currently being funded through the state government. So the state would be able to decrease their overall budget as a result of moving to something like this. So finally is just kind of the
Oh, good.
the full, all the information we went through on the page. So with that, I'm happy to answer more questions or more discussion.
All right. Yeah, I guess we'll go through technical questions and then we'll talk about process. Ms. Salazar.
Thank you. I'd love to get this via email.
Yes.
Please. And well done on going through these. This is very, very informative. Obviously, since you have the taxes in this chart, these could be pursued independent of those other two because those other two are state actions or options, and these would be something more controlled at the municipal level. So in a, I don't know, a different type of world, there could be a couple of different options kind of working simultaneously. Right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other sort of technical questions? Yeah, Ms. France.
So we heard that it's not feasible to do like a seasonal sales tax. And one piece of feedback I've gotten from constituents is, well, why can't we do like they do in Matsu, for a targeted tax to build a specific thing or pay down a certain debt? But that's the same issue, right? I mean, of doing it seasonally is that depending on which option, the number of employees and starting up and getting going, and so on. Correct?
Yes, so I think that's a model that obviously the Matsu's used, and I think a number of other cities around the country have kind of used that model where they have put together a list of capital projects that would be in the hundreds of millions of dollar range and said, we're going to institute a sales tax, a payroll tax, whatever tax for X number of years at X percentage until we raise the amount of money that totals the amount for the construction of this identified list of capital projects, and when that happens, the tax goes away.
And Jason, just to add to that, another scenario which I think is pretty common is they have an existing sales tax year-round, and then they add an increment on top of that temporarily. It's kind of like a roof replacement pack, or it's there until that particular project is paid for. And then there's a more direct connection with the public in terms of where their sales tax money is being used.
Thank you.
All right. Any other technical questions before we move on to process? Yeah.
Is it possible for us to, kind of along those lines, even if it was a general tax, to dedicate where the money might go? Because that's always a question that kind of is a remnant from the last alcohol tax. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like buckets, or, I mean, I get the project specific, but if we weren't looking at time limited, could these be potentially dedicated?
Yes, I think that's essentially what we attempted to do with the alcohol tax. I think I don't remember the exact buckets, but I mean it was there was homelessness, there was some law enforcement, and there was one other bucket that I'm not remembering.
The prohibition on dedicated revenue is a state prohibition for state revenue, not municipal.
And I have one quick follow-up to that. If we did that and it was dedicated, what would it take to either rededicate or undedicate? So if initially the tax was dedicated and it was like homelessness, let's just hope we solve that, or we don't need that amount of revenue, then how could we shift? What kind of fluidity might exist?
If you wanted to undedicate a certain percentage, I think my view would be probably have to go back to it and go to the people.
Unless you put a trigger in the authorizing implementation.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. See if I can ask this correctly. So if any of the tax revenues generated are a 50-50 with 50% just going back into the general budget and 50% offsetting property taxes, what does that actually do to the tax cap?
I don't think it actually, Lance may be a little better answer that. I don't think it actually does anything to the tax cap. It's just
Yep, it would not
the
affect
amount
tax cap. It
of.
would just change the color of the money inside the cap. Diversify the revenues more so than what's in the cap. It wouldn't make the cap necessarily go up or down by adding this. It would just change the makeup inside that cap.
Even when you're potentially generating more funds?
Because what would happen is you would generate more funds in the bed tax, and then all of the other pieces inside the bed tax remain the same. The property taxes would go down.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Falsey.
Oh, just a historical note, you asked when the sales tax had gone to voters in the past, at least two times. One was 2006, where I got yes in the amount of 30.02%, and that was 69.98%. The other was 2001, where yeses on a 2% sales tax were 28.63%, 71%.
What was the percentage? I'm sorry.
2% was what went to the voters in 2001, and give me 30 seconds, I can tell you what it was in 2006. I'll have to dig it out. Maybe we'll do a little
At
more.
that, yeah. At that rate, we'll get 34 or 36% this time.
All right. Just one last opportunity. Any last technical questions? Okay. So just to preface for process, I think whatever route that we decide to go, I think it's going to be important to make sure the public understands why the administration and the assembly are even having this discussion in the first place. And I think we went through a little bit of that. And so we'll flesh out how we can educate the public on this, because I can understand a lot of the concerns there. So with that, 3%. 3%.
2006.
So they upped the percentage and they're failing miserably? But they got more the second time.
It doesn't. But a huge percentage of the population doesn't care what percentage is. They're going to vote no regardless.
I agree, but it just seems like upping it.
All right. So with that, let's go ahead and start talking process. Sorry. What did you want?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess this might be process. We had the 5% alcohol tax on the ballot last year. Came about 2,000 votes short, as I recall. So does anybody have a projection or prediction of how close we'll get on with a 2% alcohol tax? Anybody throwing out ideas or numbers about that?
Yeah,
I was just going to note that Tiffany Hall's in the audience, and she works for Recover Alaska. Might have probably a more educated comment than the rest of us if she wants to share.
We did do a poll, but we did not ask about how they feel about a 2% tax.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Just wondered.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, can I say also on
Sure.
that?
Yeah.
On alcohol tax, and I don't know when we want to start substantively talking about these, but the alcohol tax proposal we put forward did not have any money under the tax cap, right? It was all outside, and presumably that would help a little bit, although you never know. But this, in some way, this is like kind of fundamentally different than the tax cap, the alcohol tax we proposed.
Correct. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. All right. So then let's talk process. So we have all of these different options. The assumptions here is that all of these, whichever ones we decide to go to the ballot, are in this upcoming April. So the date of implementation assumes April and April. Okay. So then, so pay attention to that date implemented. That's going to be important. So then how, dear colleagues, with everything that we have going on, do we want to have discussions on all of these proposals? And I think you had your hand up. Ms. Davis?
Oh, I was going to, tell me if you want to answer this later. Remind me, did you say half of it goes into property tax relief under the cap and half of it is above? Is that the assumption for the numbers?
That is the assumption for the number.
Okay, so the 73 million would be a net to the muni after?
No. So the total number, you have to take half of that.
Okay, that's helpful.
Based on the 2%, half of it. Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Constant.
What I had hoped to see and haven't seen yet is some external force acting on us to demand that we act, instead of just having us be, continuously conceiving and pushing out these policy questions. And so I appreciate the work that Recover Alaska has done, and it would be nice to have somebody leading the charge to say we need new revenue that isn't us, because we need to be responsive as much as we need to be in front of it.
That's interesting. So, then your perception is people asking us to solve homelessness that isn't asking for new revenue?
It's too tertiary. What I would like to hear is a community voice, similar to what we heard from our friends over at the AEDC, but not them, because it's a shelf-worn voice. But it would be nice to have some external force driving this conversation for us, because they're tired of hearing us talk about new revenue.
Mr. Welton.
I have 2 points. One, kind of on your homeless thing. I hear as often as tax me more so we can solve homelessness. I'm not giving you another dime until you fix that problem.
Right.
So it cuts both ways. But if we're doing, the stormwater utility has got so many people so consternated and nervous about how we're going to screw them this time, and then we have this on top. You're just it's already a no, and then you're going to make it even more likely. People are just so confused, worried.
Thank you.
Too much at once.
Ms. Alatel.
Thank you. I actually have to disagree a little bit with the sentiment. When we put out the Help Anchorage email address, I got so many emails saying, please tax me. Of course, they wanted me to do, or us to do an income tax. We cannot do that, I don't think. So I think these proposals are well within what we've heard the public saying is we need new revenue to deal with serious problems that are, quite honestly, draining our budget in substantial ways. And I think, it may not be a single voice or a single organization leading that charge, but I think if you go back, I don't know if you still have them, and you examine those emails or maybe even do a search, I think you'll see the word tax in there more than you would expect. Amongst the ones who want it solved now, a lot are saying, well, we're going to have to contribute some funds somehow, and if we don't, we aren't able to move forward. I think any of these proposals are worth vetting in companion with actually this current budget, which operationalizes some of the things we've been doing as ongoing expenses, which will have to be funded. So I would just push back on the idea that there isn't anyone leading the charge. I think individuals are saying, yes, please. Maybe not everyone, but I think it's worth the conversation.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
I think one of the ways you might want to start kind of the public conversation is to just do that, just have a public conversation, whether you call it a town hall or whatever, but do something way before you ever decide to put out an ordinance that suggests that the assembly is on track A. And there are plenty of people in my neck of the woods that just don't give any value to a lot of services or whatever that are given in Anchorage, and they are more concerned about the value of their property going up every year, which causes them to have to pay more taxes. So if there's a way to offset that, and the only conversation I've ever heard has been if everybody could share in the responsibility for revenues in this city, that would be their goal, is that everybody has a fair share and that it's not always the taxpayer burden. But I think there are plenty of issues you can say, this costs more, we need to take care of this. Just come up with a list, whatever it is. I don't think you have to specifically say, oh, we're going to solve homelessness or we're going to fix the port. There's just enough that you could put together a list on that for people to understand maybe what all those things are. Would be valuable, but just to have a general conversation of where we're at. I think one thing that's really going to hit my neck of the woods hard is the idea of paying for the entitled state non-reimbursement of school bonds. So, people are just gasping in horror when they hear what their new tax bill is going to be because of that. So even if you started with that conversation of the reality of what kind of debt we have that has to be paid, people want to know that, and they probably would be a little more willing to listen to just having a bit of an overall general conversation, and I think that would be a whole lot more welcome than, like I said, just coming forward with some kind of ordinance that says, oh, we're going down this route, because it's always about this is what the assembly is doing to us, and if we can avoid that, make some headway.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
I want to agree with Crystal, actually. I think it's really important when you launch these kind of conversations with the public about fiscal solutions, you articulate clearly what the values and what the goals are first, rather than coming forward with individual solutions. In this room, you all are exposed to these things on a regular basis. You have a great familiarity with sort of the issues that we grapple with regularly. The public isn't there yet. They look at a tax bill and that's what they see. They call the cops and the cops come and the cops don't come, and that's the interaction that they have. I think before launching into the specifics of whatever proposals you're going to look at, I would make sure that you give people choices of what they're looking at. You articulate what it is you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it.
I just want to clarify one thing. You're saying a lot of youth.
Yeah.
So are you?
Well, this is because you're talking about what you all wanted to do. I'm like, no matter what you do, I'm going to get blamed for it. So,
but you've got the PowerPoint. You could do a town hall based on this PowerPoint, led by your administration, right?
Yes, we could.
Okay. I'll leave it at that.
No, look,
you guys are going to sit behind me or in front of me.
I've done this before.
Sure.
I'm just saying that many of you will carry on this battle long after I'm gone from the political scene. It's just the way that it's normally done, where people throw out a proposal, is a recipe for failure. You've got to talk about your values and your goals first.
Thank you.
That's a generic you, not you.
I'll add you to the team. Ms. LaFrance.
I'm okay.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cox.
I just would add to that, this comes back to that age-old challenge that we face. While we are 11 people, we are the lowest paid employees of the municipality, and we carry one of the highest burdens of the work that has to be done, and we don't have a paid professional staff. And I know your team is limited because they're all working hard on the business of the city, but it's not something that we can functionally champion without support, and our clerk staff isn't the support. And so where does that come from if we choose to do this is the functional question that I think we have to resolve. Because as much as we want to be your champions, we have to continue, and it's on top of the other one, so we just need the support to make that happen if we're going to be any part of that conversation. So it's a team effort.
Ms. Kennedy. Oh, sorry, Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
I agree with Chris. Thanks for bringing that up. We want to help, but our capacity is a lot more limited than other folks in this room. This might be inappropriate, so you can kind of cut me off, but I think when we're thinking about which one of these we're interested in, having the values conversation and what we could do with it is really important, but I also think it's important to think who would, as a group, an outside group, champion that, and who would lead that. And I think that part of why the reason the alcohol tax failed is because we didn't have a good group of people who were championing it. So how do we do that if it's a sales tax? I mean, who's like, yeah, I'm all about sales tax. So it's just something to put out
on the hillside.
So
what was that?
So property taxpayers on the hillside.
But they're not going to individually get together to. So I'm trying not to use that campaign word, but you guys know what I mean.
Yeah, we know what you mean. So, I want to say that there is, in my mind, two separate but parallel tracks here, right? There is the public entity that's going to run the campaign, that advocates for this, and advocates for people to vote yes. And then there's going to be, up until when we vote to put this on the ballot, how are we going to educate the public? And I think both of those are critical. Mr. Gates.
Oh, thank you. Senator Quinn-Davidson, and I think the Budget Advisory Commission is really a necessary body to review and make recommendations, things like this. So I don't know if you've taken these various revenue sources to them, but they did have a resolution before we proposed the gas tax for events. And that was successful. Maybe not because of them, but it's a good process.
Thank you. What do you think, Mr. Wilbur? Do you think they'd be game?
Well, and Jed is here. Jed represents the BAC.
Well, there you go.
I assume that's why you're here. No.
We'll do our best to get, do what we can to support you guys and finding out more information.
Thank you. All right. Any other? Yes, Ms. Kennedy.
Well, I was just going to suggest that maybe there's an inexpensive way to find, a third party that could just basically run a presentation, and not that any decisions have to be made, but just an idea of being able to expose it to the public and get a sense back from them of where they would fall in all this. I mean, to me, this is easy survey stuff. That, that right there can get you an answer before you ever put anything out in terms of on the ballot or in the form of an ordinance. So anyway, I think there are probably ways to get at this, but I don't think there's any quick, this isn't a 3-month turnaround kind of a thing. Sorry, but it's not gonna, it's gonna take longer than that.
Okay, Ms. LaFrance.
Actually, I'm surprised Mr. Whittleton hasn't suggested rate choice.
Whoa.
Rate choice, sorry.
Don't go there.
Actually, what would be a way to go about getting a little more context? I know, Mr. Fowler, you mentioned the 2 sales tax votes, but I'm curious as to, I know we heard one was 2%, one was 3%. Were those both outside the cap or property tax relief? And have there been other attempts, I don't know, for the last 20 years or so to increase bed tax? Or this is the first I've heard of a payroll tax coming up too. It doesn't seem to have been part of the discussion before. So I'd be just curious if anyone had thoughts on where to get some more context.
Yeah, I think that Eric Larson in Treasury has actually done a lot of that homework, so we might be able to give you a ready, well-researched answer. As I say here now, payroll tax is a brand new idea. I'm only aware of the 2001-2006 sales tax changes. I don't remember what portion was under the tax cap above. Alcohol went to the voters last year, and then twice in the 90s. The first time it was entirely above the cap, and it failed 48% or something. The next year it was entirely under the cap, and it failed 47%. Which is kind of bizarre. So it's question whether voters can do around that. And bed tax has gone to the voters, I think, twice, and passed both times. 2005 was the last time.
And that was narrow. Passage.
I had a follow-up, I'm trying to remember, except that we hear a lot of anecdotal reasons why things pass or fail, and I know feedback I've heard is people want property tax relief to some of the points you raised, Crystal, and want like an upper limit or even a time frame or other ties to our priorities and needs. So I don't know that how we could get that information or analysis, but it would be helpful, I think, too. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gates.
Oh, thank you. There's another revenue source, taxation, that wasn't on the list here, and it just occurred to me that, and I thought I would mention it, we have a proposal in the 2000s for a gross receipts tax on businesses who have the privilege of doing business in the municipality. We haven't researched it, but I think that it came up as an ordinance. Maybe it didn't move forward. I'm not sure, but it's another possibility if you're considering others.
Thank you. All right, so I want to acknowledge, because I think it's really important for us to figure out a direction here so that you guys can direct me how to move on. So I want to acknowledge what Ms. Kennedy said and state somewhat of an opposition to what she said. I'm going to get everyone else's opinion. So, did you have a...
I do have a thing to add to consider as we move forward.
Sure.
The bed tax in particular, I think, we're worried about getting kind of the temperature on it. I mean, I think that one might be the easiest in terms of we could talk to the people who, are primarily going to be responsible for paying it. That is probably the easiest one to catch the temperature on in terms of who pays the bed tax. Because it may say 400, but a lot of those are hotel operators. It's the tourist industry often. So I just want to toss that out there as we were contemplating how to kind of get some of this temperature. That might be the easiest one to kind of get the first feedback on.
Thank you. Separate from what I was going to say?
Just
Sure.
responding to Meg.
Yeah.
So we did, the administration proposed a bed tax increase 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, and they came out very strongly opposed to it, and it failed.
The climate might have changed a little bit.
Yeah. Well, climate is changing, I've heard.
On this same thing? Yeah, Ms. Kennedy.
Yeah. Well, the point being, too, that a lot of people who do come in are Alaskans. They're the people that come in for AFN or for medical appointments or whatever. So some of these, they may not be residents of Anchorage, but they're Alaskans. It's not like we're getting tourists because they don't live here.
Thank you. Good point. All right. So then going back to what I was saying, and I guess I'm just going to go down because I want to hear from everyone. So have an opinion. Do you think we can have this discussion adequately and be prepared to put stuff on the ballot for April. That's the, I guess, yeah, that's the question I want to start with. So, Mr. Weddle.
Well, I'm skeptical. I think this might be a better January discussion for the next round. We've got, I think, just a lot of things going on that have people confused. I mean, I think the rollout of the stormwater utility, would that be smooth and so on, and, which I mentioned. I think just we've got so many pieces moving now, and I think ASD tax increase. I mean, people are just, it's more than they have understanding of. And then you just get a no and you get people mad. So to me, it's a rollout, like Chris was and the others have said. Chris, as you make that case and get people saying, do it. Like have a kind of a community effort more than
Thank you. Mr. Peters.
Well, I think, the alcohol tax was on the ballot last year, and if we reduce what we were asking for by half or somewhere in that vicinity, maybe we get the extra 2,000 votes to get that passed this time. It depends on how many 100,000 or million Budweiser and Miller want to spend to stop it again. Maybe if it's only 2 or 2.5%, maybe they don't spend that as much to stop it. Who knows?
So then, just to clarify your position, so yes, let's have the discussion again on the alcohol tax because we had that already. But the rest of them, let's wait.
Well, I mean, the bed tax. I think the Visitors Convention Bureau, I think, came out pretty strongly against that last year. But the sell to the citizens is that 85% or 90% comes from visitors. And maybe if we want to make that an easier sell, we pull the Seattle idea where if you show an Alaska ID, they waive the 2% to you when you check in. Well, they used to do that, but they don't do that anymore.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
I think similar to my two colleagues here, I think that for this year, things that could possibly get on the ballot, I think it's worth at least talking about the bed tax and the alcohol tax. I think the sales tax is a longer conversation. I remember when I first got on the body having a conversation with Mr. Evans, and it was an incredibly complicated piece of legislation that Dean helped write, and Dan has talked about this too. It's very complicated to set up a sales tax. So I think trying to set it up for this April election is a fool's errand. The payroll tax, I have already confessed my ignorance. I don't really even understand how it works yet. And I know the rest of the community doesn't either. So in a similar vein, I think those two, if we want, we could start having a conversation now, but I think the actual action would be taken until a year and a half from now. But I think bed and alcohol are fairly straightforward, and the alcohol tax, I think, is the most promising in the sense that I think we could tweak what we did last year to try to address some of the specific concerns that people came out at, and perhaps go back and get a similar result, or get get past this time, given how close we came last time.
Thank you. Ms. Allen.
I tend to agree with Mr. Dunbar that the bed and the alcohol tax are probably the most readily to go. They're not completely unfamiliar. I'm intrigued by the payroll tax for sure to learn more, but I Googled the terms payroll tax and it actually brings up a lot of information about income tax. So just that's a tough one. So I think it's worth exploring and worthwhile given the budget realities to push through. I know it is more work and it is a lot of work to do that so that we can bring the question to the voters sooner than later.
Thank you. Mr. Hudson.
Yeah, I functionally divide these in half. You have two that are substantive revenue generators and two that are, well, it's revenue, it's just a bite. And so those are, for that reason, more easy to wrap your mind around and more short term. Those other two, I think, really need to be a long term and really robust conversation in the community.
You're talking about sales and payroll and
Yeah, of course, the big ones. And so I'm agnostic on the first two, not because I don't want the revenue, but for some of the reasons Mr. Weddleton has brought up, there is a sense of kind of fear and paranoia in the air about what's coming in the face of the state. And so that argues for patience, but I would probably support moving forward on those. But for sure, those big ticket items, we need to spend some real thorough time vetting to get there.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thanks. Yeah, still thinking through, but as far as, I mean, the more we push it out and just the startup on some of these being 1 to 2 years, maybe is a consideration. I mean, we've seen some things move faster than some of us would like by just being virtue of lay it on the table, and I'm hoping nobody lays anything on the table. But it does get the conversation going too when something is on the ballot or being discussed. But I'm also surprised to hear that sales taxes are so complex. I think Mr. Moore said like hundreds of decisions.
What's in, what's not.
That would need to be made. So obviously that's going to take a lot of time.
Thank you. To quickly give my opinion, I believe, and I run into voters and constituents all the time who tell me municipal government is the only hope that they have. And that the state's not going to have this discussion, that we better damn well have this discussion. I'm just going to leave it at that. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. You know, I think for me, this is a question between something that's really punitive and something that might have a carrot. And when I look at the bed and alcohol tax, for the most part, the bed tax doesn't really impact most of us here. So that's probably not a big issue to worry about. However, it doesn't raise a lot of money either. And it does nothing to offset the property tax burden. So if you want to have the bigger conversation where the bigger carrot is, then I think that's going to take some time. So, you know, I'm not necessarily opposed to the bed tax. I wouldn't bother with the alcohol tax because, again, that's going to appear to be punitive, and it's all about gaining revenue, not necessarily alleviating the burden of the taxpayer. So I think we need time.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
I'm still thinking through it. I think the alcohol tax could pass. It was just a fundraising issue, given how close the vote was. But I'm more interested in the sales tax long term. I feel like that has a lot more potential to make a big difference in the city, and so I wouldn't want to try to do an alcohol tax again and then struggle with some of the same things we struggled with, and then in 2021 bring back a sales tax and people are like, we're tired of this, and there's this baggage. But that's all sort of political intuition, and I think that I'd rather rely less on just the intuition and more comprehensive discussion about what are polls or what's out there. Like, is there more information out there? Because I just feel like us all saying, oh, I think we should do this. I mean, I get people all the time who ask me, why don't we have a sales tax? Why don't we have a sales tax? And that we represent very different districts, but that especially spiked after all this crap with Dunleavy. And I had people coming up to me in the store saying, why don't we have a sales tax? We need to pay for ourselves. We're on our own. So I feel pretty passionately that we need to pursue a sales tax, and I just don't want to, whether it's now or in a year, and I don't want to harm our opportunity to do that by doing other things and not doing them well.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
I would add, I agree with that sentiment, that there is risk. I know, I'm just saying there's risk in running something in advance of something big, and that just has to be calculated.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so the way that the rest of this meeting is going to unfold, sorry, I just have to control it. So I'm going to give Jason an opportunity to respond, and then I'm going to do one last yes-no specific to a town hall. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention, as the mayor, and I think pretty much everyone has said, I think a conversation with the public needs to be had, but at the same time, we are somewhat at the mercy of the state. I think this governor has repeatedly said to expect an additional $300 to $500 million in reductions next year. And we saw how that impacted us this year with that amount. So double that next year. So the further we get from having these types of conversations, I think the further we're going to be in the mode that I think all of us feel we're in sometimes, which is, what do we not do? Who do we not serve? Who do we not help? So I would just throw that out there for consideration.
Thank you. All right, so last question. And the question is, should leadership Suzanne and I begin talking with the administration on organizing a town hall event.
To discuss all.
To discuss everything, yeah. John, we're just going to go, and I really just want to yes, no.
I can't give you, I guess my answer is no, but it's no because I'd rather put that effort into doing the stormwater utility and having that.
I knew you were going to mention stormwater utility.
I just think we've started it.
All right.
It's rolled out horribly. We need to back up and do it right, or we're going to pay and it'll fail.
Okay, got it.
Town hall, I think if we present them all, it's too confusing. Pick one or two and present them. Present all four of those, their eyes are going to glaze over.
Okay. So then maybe I'll do it this way. I don't want to pick the structure of the town hall. I don't want us to debate that. Let's just say, shall we have a town hall? So then Pete, does your answer change?
Yeah, okay, let's have it.
Okay, great.
Yes, if Bill Falsey gives the PowerPoint.
Just a history lesson.
Nothing wrong with you, Jason, but there were no red lines and moving objects.
Ouch.
We know which part you did.
Thank you.
Sure, why not?
Thank you, Chris.
Yes, but it depends on the timing. Budget season is not the best time.
Yeah, Suzanne.
Yes.
All right, yes.
Yes, agree with the timing issue. Yes.
All right, great. So with that, we will go ahead and open it up to audience participation. Would anyone like to participate? Someone jump forward, please. Someone.
Here's looking at this tax question issue. You talked about sales tax.
Dick, say your name for the record.
Dick Trading. I don't think you can look at the exemptions on military sales tax. You can't tax the military base. That means forced to go there and buy anything vehicles that I can, from cars to boats and back again. They're exempt. You can't tax them. 2 years ago, Congress passed a law that anybody ever served in the military got honorable discharged and shopped the VX on base. They're completely exempt, or they can use their catalog. It's a big catalog. So you've got to figure out your $73 million, you've got to figure out what the leakage is. Because everybody wants to be exempt from it. Well, you set and what means a lot of this. The first one's the one to be exempt to lawyers, and then the newspapers. And they keep trying to pare down those who will pay it, so that's the problem you've got. But try an excise tax, because that doesn't have to go to the voters. That you can pass on your own.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Eugene Haberman, WIM, South Point Government Watchdog. First, I'd like to compliment the last 2 minutes presentations. They were very thorough with a very limited time to address it. Start there. But I'd also like to point out these two key things, and since you know I cover all that territory, and let's take that sales tax. And you're looking for what is the public going to do and how they're going to accept this and address it. Well, it's less roughly 2 months ago, the Manchester Borough had a public hearing on a borough sales tax. The mayor made a commitment to chairs the meeting. There would be 2 public hearings. Everyone who testified in the first public hearing could speak at both, by the way, unlike the Anchorage Assembly. They broke that commitment. People came to the second public hearing. The mayor and the assembly said it's going to be taken off the agenda, and that's the end of it. The public there, and we're talking about over 100,000 people that live there, the second largest populated area, and a significant portion commutes to Anchorage, okay, that connects with what's going on here, including me. What's the situation? And the last thing I'd like to say is this word town hall meeting. I believe in town hall meetings, but I've yet to see a town hall meeting that really is a town hall meeting. When you dealt with the municipal light and power and Chugach sale, I saw what happened. It was Lusac Library, mayor, 2 representatives, Chugach, and municipal light and power, and the public was told, you know, any question and comment. Wouldn't you be honest and basically say, you don't call it a town hall meeting, but a presentation? And you do it in Lusac Chamber at a time when the public can be there, and you do extensive advertising many weeks in advance, and this is what the presentation is going to be about. But even better, do these meetings that you have here, this was a good presentation. Imagine if you were over in Lusac Library, I'll close with this, and you had these meetings out there. This would have been a video audio of this discussion you had on this. And the public would have heard what you all had to say, not some selected person that you're going to appoint to do a town hall meeting.
this would have been more valuable and more reaching, and the public would understand where you're coming from and where you're going. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tiffany Hall, Recover Alaska. Thanks very much to the chair. Just wanted to let you know, I heard you ask about who has alcohol and sales tax. In Alaska, it's Bethel, Dillingham, Juneau, Kotzebue, Craig, North Pole, Euless, and St. Mary's all have both, between 15% and 3%. And outside of that, Fairbanks Borough, Fairbanks City, and Newtopic all have alcohol tax, not a sales tax. A couple of things just to point out that I really appreciate these costs. One thing it doesn't take into account is the costs that will be saved by the state and the municipality if alcohol tax is increased because of the number of people who will reduce their drinking, primarily underage people and people who drink to excess, which includes a lot of disease, death, and DUIs. So costs will be saved there. I also want to point out that there very much is a group that is ready to be a proponent for the alcohol tax. We had a meeting in May and over 40 people were there representing organizations who were in favor of looking at this again. And we have done some initial polling. They don't align with these, and I don't want to carry us over the meeting, but there are some folks who are ready to fight for this. And I would also just question if y'all helped to put it on the ballot. I would also be looking to see, as you mentioned, what else you might be able to do in support of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to participate? Seeing no one, we're going to go ahead and adjourn.